You go occasionally to somebody else. It's beginning to get tiresome.
Oh, excuse me, mister. I never knowed it was you. I never looked at your face. I just looked at your hands and the money you gave.
Funny. A man all by himself in a bandit country with a string of burros, and his friends behind him on a horseback.
One of these made him call the director personally to ask how a specific shot was achieved, because he'd been trying to replicate it for years. One he attempted to acquire the remake rights for, and offered double what the studio was asking, only to be told it wasn't for sale at any price. And one made him openly admit in an interview that if he could trade his entire filmography for this single film, he would make that deal immediately. Number 7. Ride the High Country, 1962.
How'd we figure? $1,000 a shot?
Yeah.
Those boys sure.
Oh, Mr. Western.
Evening, honey.
Go ahead. Stop that.
What did I do?
Never mind what you did. Don't...
Sam Peckinpah made this one for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer with a budget of approximately $800,000 and delivered what Eastwood has called the most emotionally honest Western about aging and obsolescence ever made, a film that understood the West was dying, and that the men who built it were dying with it, and that there was genuine tragedy in that passing. Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea play two former lawmen, now broke and marginalized, who take a job transporting gold from a mining camp and gradually reveal that one of them plans to steal it, while the other still clings to the old codes of honor that the modern world no longer respects or rewards. Eastwood saw this film early in his career when he was still doing rawhide television episodes, and has said it taught him that Westerns could be about something other than action and adventure, that they could examine what happened to men whose skills and values had become obsolete. The relationship between the two aging gunfighters, played with extraordinary dignity and melancholy by Scott and McCrea in what would be their final Western roles, became a template for relationships Eastwood would explore throughout his own directing career, particularly in Unforgiven, where aging killers discover their bodies and their reputations no longer function as they once did. Peckinpah shot the film in the High Sierras with cinematographer Lucien Ballard, creating images of autumnal beauty that mirror the characters' awareness of their own mortality. The landscapes are gorgeous, but the beauty emphasizes loss rather than celebrating frontier mythology. Eastwood has talked extensively about this aesthetic choice, about how Peckinpah made the visual beauty of the West inseparable from the sadness of its passing, and how he attempted similar techniques in his own films, including Pale Rider and Unforgiven. The film's climax, in which the two old lawmen face down the Hammond brothers in a gunfight they know would likely kill them, is staged without heroic exaggeration. These are old men whose reflexes have slowed, whose bodies hurt, who understand they are choosing to die for a code that nobody else remembers or values. The gunfight is brief and brutal, and when it ends, McCrea's character dies not with a dramatic speech, but with a simple statement about having entered his house justified, invoking the biblical language that gave his life meaning even as the world around him abandoned that framework entirely. Eastwood has stated in multiple interviews that Ride the High Country is the Western he wishes he had made because it achieved perfect balance between acknowledging the genre's mythology and dismantling it, between respecting the men who lived by the old codes and recognizing those codes were always problematic and were certainly inadequate for the modern world. His own Unforgiven attempts that same balance, and Eastwood has acknowledged the debt directly, calling Peckinpah's film the template for how to make a revisionist Western that criticizes the genre without condescending to it. The film was not a significant commercial success, and M gave it minimal marketing support, releasing it as a B picture despite the quality of the filmmaking. Its reputation grew substantially through the 1970s as Peckinpah's other work generated critical attention, and as the new Hollywood generation of filmmakers identified it as an influence. Eastwood championed it publicly throughout his career, and has screened it for collaborators as an example of how restraint and genuine emotion can generate more impact than spectacle. Number 6. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962.
Sir?
John Ford made this one for Paramount Pictures with John Wayne and James Stewart and delivered what Eastwood has called the most thematically sophisticated examination of how the West was mythologized and how that mythology concealed uncomfortable truths about violence and credit and the construction of heroic narratives. Stewart plays Ransom Stoddard, a lawyer who becomes celebrated as the man who shot the outlaw Liberty Valance and who built a political career on that reputation. Wayne plays Tom Doniphan, who knows the truth about what actually happened and who sacrificed his own future to protect that false narrative. Eastwood encountered this film when he was already established as a Western star through the Sergio Leone collaborations, and he has said it forced him to reconsider everything he thought he understood about the genre. Ford was interrogating his own mythology, acknowledging that the heroic West he had spent decades depicting in films like Stagecoach and The Searchers was built on lies and erasures, and that the real violence required to establish civilization was committed by men who received no credit and no glory for it. That level of self-critique from the genre's greatest director gave Eastwood permission to attempt similar interrogation in his own work. The film's structure, built around an extended flashback as the elderly Stoddard returns to Shinbone for Doniphan's funeral and tells a newspaper editor the true story, allows Ford to juxtapose the mythological version of events against what actually occurred. The famous line, delivered by the editor after hearing the truth, that when the legend becomes fact, you print the legend, has become one of the most quoted lines in cinema, precisely because it captures something essential about how American history and American Westerns both operate through selective memory and convenient fiction. What Eastwood has identified as the film's greatest achievement is Ford's refusal to fully condemn either the myth or the truth. His recognition that civilization required both Stoddard's law and education, and Doniphan's capacity for violence, and that erasing Doniphan's contribution was unjust but perhaps necessary for the society Stoddard represented to function. That moral complexity, the acknowledgement that progress requires both construction and concealment, influenced how Eastwood approached the relationship between civilization and violence in his own films. The film was shot entirely on sound stages, which was unusual for a Ford Western, and which gave it a deliberately artificial quality that emphasized its concern with mythology rather than with historical recreation. Eastwood has noted this aesthetic choice in interviews, observing that Ford was making a film about storytelling rather than about the West itself, and that the stagey quality served that purpose perfectly. When Eastwood made Unforgiven, he shot on location in Alberta, specifically to create a visual contrast with the mythological Westerns he was critiquing, but he understood that Ford's different approach achieved similar ends through opposite means. The ending, in which Stoddard and his wife leave Shinbone on a train while the conductor offers them special treatment because of Stoddard's famous history, knowing that Stoddard is celebrated for something he did not do while the man who actually saved him died alone and forgotten, is one of the most emotionally devastating conclusions in Ford's work. Eastwood has called it perfect and has said that if he had directed it himself, he would not have changed a single frame. The film that Ford made late in his career, dismantling his own mythology, remains for Eastwood the gold standard for how to make a Western that honors the genre while acknowledging its lies. Number 5. McCabe and Mrs. A. Miller, 1971.
I'm bloody starving. Took 6 hours to get up here in that flipping contraption.
I was in a poker game when I got shot. Killed.
Robert Altman made this one for Warner Brothers with a budget of approximately $3.5 million and delivered what Eastwood has called the most visually beautiful and most emotionally devastating subversion of Western mythology ever achieved. A film that took every convention of the genre and inverted it, showing the West as a place of mud and commerce and corporate power, rather than heroism and individual freedom. Warren Beatty plays John McCabe, a gambler who establishes a brothel in a Pacific Northwest mining town. Julie Christie plays Mrs. Miller, a prostitute and businesswoman who partners with him to expand the operation. And the film watches as their modest success attracts the attention of a mining corporation that wants to buy them out and will kill them if they refuse. Eastwood attempted to option the rights to remake this film in the early 1990s, and was told by Warner Brothers that Altman had contractual control over remake rights, and had stated publicly he would never allow it to be remade under any circumstances. Eastwood has said in interviews that this was the only time in his career he seriously pursued remaking another director's Western rather than creating original material, which indicates how profoundly McCabe and Mrs. Miller affected him, and how completely he felt Altman had achieved something he wanted to attempt himself. What makes the film so distinctive is Altman's complete rejection of Western visual conventions. Cinematographer Vilmos Zsigmond used a technique called flashing, exposing the film stock to light before shooting to create a desaturated, almost antique photograph quality. The result is a film that looks like no other Western, with muted colors and soft focus that make the frontier town look genuinely cold and muddy and unpleasant rather than romantically rugged. Eastwood has talked extensively about this visual approach and how it influenced his own thinking about how to shoot Westerns without romanticizing them. The film's sound design, which layers overlapping dialogue and ambient noise in ways that make individual conversations difficult to parse, creates an atmosphere of constant low-level chaos that most Westerns avoid. Altman wanted the town to feel like a real place where multiple things happen simultaneously, rather than like a stage where the camera captures only dramatically relevant action. That commitment to environmental authenticity influenced Eastwood's approach to staging town sequences in Unforgiven, where background activity continues regardless of foreground drama. The ending, in which McCabe is killed by corporate enforcers while the entire town fights a church fire and nobody notices or cares that their founder is bleeding to death in the snow, is one of the most nihilistic conclusions in American cinema. Eastwood has called it devastating and perfect, a complete rejection of the Western's promise that individual heroism matters, or that communities remember their heroes. McCabe dies alone and forgotten, while the community he built survives without acknowledging his sacrifice, which is precisely the opposite of how Westerns typically resolve. Eastwood wanted to achieve something similar in his own films, and has acknowledged that McCabe and Mrs. Miller provided the template for how to make that kind of ending emotionally devastating, rather than merely cynical. Number 4. The Wild Bunch, 1969.
You, didn't they, eh? Tied a tin can to your tail, led you in and waltzed you out again. Oh, my, what a...
Sam Peckinpah made this one for Warner Brothers, 7 Arts, with a budget of approximately $6 million after the studio reluctantly greenlit it following his success with The Wild Bunch, and delivered what Eastwood has called the most formally perfect and most emotionally devastating action Western ever made. A film that changed what the genre was permitted to show and how it was permitted to show it. William Holden leads a gang of aging outlaws on one last job in a Mexico being overtaken by the 20th century. And Peckinpah uses that premise to examine loyalty, obsolescence, and the specific codes men create to give meaning to lives the world has moved beyond. Eastwood tried to acquire the remake rights to The Wild Bunch in the mid-1990s, offering Warner Brothers substantially more than the studio's asking price, and proposing to direct it himself with a contemporary cast. The studio considered the offer seriously, but ultimately declined, partly because Peckinpah's widow objected to any remake, and partly because studio executives recognized that what made The Wild Bunch revolutionary in 1969 would be impossible to replicate 30 years later. Eastwood has said this rejection disappointed him more than any other failed project, because he genuinely believed he understood what Peckinpah had achieved and wanted to pay tribute to it through reinterpretation. What makes The Wild Bunch extraordinary is Peckinpah's complete commitment to showing violence without sanitization or romanticization. The opening ambush sequence, in which the bunch rob a railroad office while bounty hunters wait in ambush and civilians are caught in the crossfire and killed, established immediately that this Western would not follow conventional genre rules. People die messily, blood sprays, victims scream, and Peckinpah uses slow motion not to beautify the violence, but to force the audience to see exactly what bullets do to human bodies. Eastwood has stated repeatedly that this sequence changed how he thought about staging action, that it demonstrated violence could be depicted honestly without becoming exploitation. The film's structure, built around several extended action sequences separated by character development and thematic exploration, influenced how Eastwood constructed Unforgiven decades later. Both films use violence sparingly but intensely, allowing the anticipation and the aftermath to generate as much impact as the violence itself. The relationship between the members of the bunch, particularly between Pike Bishop played by Holden and Dutch Engstrom played by Ernest Borgnine, mirrors relationships Eastwood explored in his own films between men bound by shared history and shared codes that the modern world no longer recognizes or values. The final shootout, in which the surviving members of the bunch walk deliberately towards certain death against impossible odds, is one of the most famous sequences in Western cinema, and one that Eastwood has analyzed extensively. The decision to make the violence both balletic and brutal simultaneously, to show men being literally torn apart by machine gun fire, while also acknowledging the tragic grandeur of their choice to die, together rather than surrender or flee, represents a tonal balance that Eastwood attempted to achieve in the climax of Unforgiven, and he has acknowledged he did not quite match. Peckinpah's use of multiple cameras shooting at different frame rates, which allowed him to cut between normal speed and slow motion within single shots, created an editorial rhythm that influenced action filmmaking permanently. Eastwood studied this technique extensively and incorporated variations of it in his own action sequences, though he has stated that Peckinpah's instinct for exactly when to slow down and when to accelerate was something that could not be taught or fully replicated. The film's ending, in which the survivors of the final shootout ride away laughing about their dead companions, captures something about masculine friendship and masculine delusion that Eastwood found both appalling and completely accurate. These men have just participated in mutual suicide, and they are laughing because the alternative is acknowledging the waste and the horror, and that refusal to acknowledge reality is presented without judgment as simply how certain men survive psychologically. The Wild Bunch was a commercial success despite its extreme violence, grossing over $25 million domestically and proving that audiences were ready for westerns that stripped away mythology and showed frontier violence as genuinely destructive. That commercial vindication of Peckinpah's approach gave Eastwood confidence that his own darker westerns could find audiences, and he has acknowledged that without the Wild Bunch demonstrating commercial viability for revisionist westerns, Unforgiven might never have been greenlit by a major studio.
The widow, the land grabber, the outlaw.
1968 Sergio Leone made this one for Paramount Pictures with a budget of approximately $5 million after the enormous success of the Dollars trilogy that made Eastwood an international star and delivered what Eastwood has called the most operatic and most purely cinematic Western ever created, a film that uses the genre's conventions with such formal mastery and such sustained visual intelligence that it transcends the Western entirely and becomes something closer to a visual symphony. Henry Fonda plays against type as Frank, a killer working for a railroad baron. Charles Bronson plays Harmonica, a man with a mysterious connection to Frank seeking revenge. Claudia Cardinale plays Jill, a former prostitute who inherits land the railroad desperately needs. Eastwood's relationship with this film is complicated by the fact that Leone made it immediately after their 3 collaborations, and cast Henry Fonda in a role that subverts everything Fonda had represented in American westerns, the same way Leone had used Eastwood to subvert conventional Western heroism. Eastwood has stated in interviews that watching Once Upon a Time in the West forced him to recognize that Leone's artistic ambitions extended far beyond what they had achieved together in the Dollars films, that Leone was capable of formal experimentation and thematic complexity that their collaborations had only hinted at. What distinguishes Once Upon a Time in the West from the Dollars trilogy is Leone's complete commitment to visual storytelling over narrative efficiency. The opening sequence at the train station runs nearly 15 minutes before any dialogue is spoken, using only images, ambient sound, and Ennio Morricone's score to establish character and create almost unbearable tension. 3 killers wait for a train. They wait in real time, A fly buzzes, water drips, the train arrives, a man with a harmonica emerges, violence happens. And in those 15 minutes, Leone establishes the entire formal approach of everything that follows. Eastwood tried to incorporate similar extended visual sequences in his own westerns, but has acknowledged that his instincts tend toward narrative momentum, rather than toward the kind of operatic patience Leone employed. The opening of Pale Rider attempts something similar, with the extended sequence of the mining camp under attack, but Eastwood has said it lacks the pure commitment to withholding information and building suspense that Leone achieved. Where Eastwood wanted to move the story forward, Leone was content to simply observe and to trust that observation would generate its own fascination. The film's use of extreme close-ups and extreme wide shots with almost nothing in between creates a visual rhythm that Eastwood found both frustrating and brilliant. Leone forces the audience to constantly adjust between epic landscape and intimate facial detail, never allowing comfortable middle-distance observation. That technique makes every shot feel heightened and significant, which serves the film's mythological ambitions, but which Eastwood recognized would not serve the more grounded realism he wanted to achieve in his own directing works. Morricone's score is among the most celebrated in film history, and Eastwood has talked extensively about how Leone used music not as accompaniment, but as a structural element equivalent to cinematography or editing. Each major character has a musical theme that plays whenever they appear, and those themes interact and overlap as the characters' fates become intertwined. Eastwood attempted similar musical strategies with Lenny Niehaus's scores for his films, but has acknowledged that the integration Leone achieved between image and music was something he never quite matched. The flashback sequence revealing harmonica's connection to Frank is staged without dialogue, using only imagery and Morricone's score, and it is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in Western cinema. A young boy forced to support his brother's weight as the brother is hanged, while the man who will become Frank watches and plays a harmonica. The image is so powerful and so precisely constructed that it requires no explanation, and Eastwood has called it the single greatest use of flashback in any film he has seen. The ending, in which Frank dies and harmonica rides away, and Jill remains to build the town that will replace the Old West, functions as Leone's farewell to the genre. The film he made after this, Duck, You Sucker, was nominally a Western, but was really about revolution and political betrayal. Once Upon a Time in the West was Leone's final pure engagement with Western mythology, and Eastwood has said that if he could erase his own filmography and replace it with this single film, he would make that exchange because what Leone achieved here represents the absolute peak of what the genre is capable of producing. Number 2. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, 1948.
You go occasionally to somebody else. It's beginning to get tiresome.
Excuse me, mister, I never knowed it was you. I never looked at your face, I just looked at your hands and the money you gave.
Funny. A man all by himself in a bandit country with a string of burros, and his friends behind him on a horseback.
John Huston made this one for Warner Brothers with a budget of approximately $3 million. Shot it almost entirely on location in Mexico, with minimal studio interference, and delivered what Eastwood has called the most psychologically precise examination of how greed destroys men ever committed to film, Western, or otherwise. Humphrey Bogart plays Fred C. Dobbs, an American drifter in Mexico, who joins two other down on their luck Americans prospecting for gold in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Walter Houston plays Howard, an experienced prospector who understands what gold does to men's souls. Tim Holt plays Curtin, the youngest and most idealistic of the three. Eastwood discovered this film relatively late, not seeing it until the early 1970s when he was already established as a Western star and was beginning to consider directing. He has stated in interviews that it immediately became one of his most watched films, that he returns to it repeatedly to study how Houston constructs Dobbs' psychological disintegration across the film's 2-hour runtime. The transformation from desperate but decent man to paranoid murderer happens gradually and believably because Houston shows every step of that progression without editorializing or simplifying. What makes The Treasure of the Sierra Madre essential is Houston's understanding that the real subject is not the search for gold, but what that search reveals about the men conducting it, Howard understands from the beginning that finding gold is easy, but keeping it requires either leaving it behind or becoming something monstrous. Dobbs cannot accept either option, and his inability to choose between them destroys him. That examination of how wealth and power corrupt not through villainy, but through ordinary human weakness, influenced how Eastwood thought about depicting moral compromise in his own films. The film's depiction of Mexico, shot on location rather than on studio backlots, gives it a texture and authenticity that most Hollywood westerns of the period lacked entirely. The poverty is real, the landscape is harsh, the bandits who eventually kill Dobbs are not cartoon villains, but desperate men themselves, operating in an environment where survival requires predation. Eastwood has talked about how this environmental authenticity influenced his decision to shoot his own westerns on location whenever possible, to ground even mythological stories in physical reality. Bogart's performance as Dobbs is one of the great portraits of psychological dissolution in American cinema. The transformation is visible in his face, in his posture, in his voice. He does not suddenly become evil. He becomes increasingly frightened and increasingly certain that his partners are plotting against him, and that certainty makes him dangerous in ways that explicit villainy never could. Eastwood attempted similar character arcs in Unforgiven, with William Money's return to violence, and in The Outlaw, Josie wails with the protagonist's inability to escape his past. The ending, in which the gold dust the men died for is blown away by wind and scattered across the desert, represents one of the most perfectly ironic conclusions in cinema. Howard and Curtin laugh at the cosmic joke while Dobbs lies dead, having achieved nothing. That recognition that ambition and violence and betrayal can amount to literally nothing, that the universe is indifferent to human striving, is the kind of bleak wisdom that most westerns avoid, but that Eastwood found genuinely profound and genuinely honest about how life actually operates. Number 1. The Searchers, 1956. John Ford made this one for Warner Brothers with a budget of approximately $3.5 million. Shot it in Monument Valley, where he had been filming westerns for 3 decades, and delivered what Eastwood has called, without qualification or hesitation, the greatest western ever made, and the film he wishes more than any other had been his to direct. John Wayne plays Ethan Edwards, a Confederate veteran who returns to Texas after the Civil War and spends years searching for his niece Debbie, captured by Comanche raiders who killed the rest of her family. The question the film poses, never answering it with complete clarity until the final moments, is whether Ethan intends to rescue Debbie or kill her for having lived among the Comanche and possibly having been assimilated into their culture. Eastwood has stated in multiple interviews spanning decades that The Searchers is the film that made him understand what westerns were capable of achieving, that it demonstrated the genre could address genuinely complex moral questions about racism, obsession, and the specific pathology of American expansion without abandoning the visual grandeur and mythological power that made westerns appealing. He saw it as a teenager, before he had any thoughts of becoming an actor, and has said it was the single most formative cinematic experience of his life, more influential on his eventual career than any other film in any genre. What makes The Searchers untouchable is Ford's complete commitment to making Ethan Edwards genuinely disturbing, while never losing sight of what drives him, or denying the audience access to his perspective. Wayne plays Ethan without sentimentality or mitigation. Ethan shoots buffalo to starve Indians. He desecrates Comanche graves. He scalps dead warriors. He threatens to kill Debbie when they finally find her, and yet, the film never reduces him to simple villainy because Ford understands that Ethan's hatred emerges from a specific historical moment and a specific set of experiences that the film presents without endorsing. The cinematography by Winton Hoche uses VistaVision and Technicolor to render Monument Valley with a grandeur that makes the landscape an active participant in the drama rather than mere background. Ford positions the human figures as small elements within vast terrain, emphasizing both the epic scale of westward expansion and the insignificance of individual human conflicts against geological time. Eastwood attempted similar landscape cinematography in his own westerns, but has acknowledged that Ford's understanding of how to use Monument Valley specifically was something developed over decades of shooting there and could not be replicated elsewhere or learned secondhand. The film's structure, spanning 7 years of searching, allows Ford to show Ethan's obsession calcifying into something approaching madness. Jeffrey Hunter plays Martin Pauley, Ethan's adopted nephew, who accompanies him partly out of loyalty and partly to ensure Ethan does not kill Debbie when they find her. The relationship between Ethan and Martin, built on mutual need and mutual suspicion, influenced every mentor-student relationship Eastwood depicted in his own films, particularly in Unforgiven, where William Money's relationship with the Schofield kid mirrors the dynamic Ford established. What Eastwood has identified as the film's supreme achievement is the ending, which remains one of the most analyzed and debated sequences in American cinema. Ethan finds Debbie, now played by Natalie Wood, and fully assimilated into Comanche culture. He chases her into a cave. Martin assumes Ethan will kill her. Instead, Ethan lifts her above his head in the gesture he used when she was a child, and says, "Let's go home, Debbie." What changed his mind at that precise moment is never explained. The film simply presents the reversal without commentary. And then Ethan brings Debbie home to the family and walks away, unable to enter the domestic space himself, framed in the doorway as the door closes between him and the civilization he is protected but cannot join. That final image of Wayne framed in the doorway, turning to walk back into the desert alone, is one of the most iconic in cinema. Eastwood has said he has spent his entire directing career attempting to create a single image that's powerful and has never succeeded. The combination of visual composition, performance, and thematic weight Ford achieves in that moment represents for Eastwood the absolute pinnacle of what cinema can accomplish. The film was not particularly well reviewed on initial release. Critics found it slow and Wayne's performance too dark, but its reputation grew steadily through the 60s and 70s as critics and filmmakers recognized what Ford had achieved. It now appears on virtually every list of the greatest American films and is considered by most serious students of the genre to be the finest Western ever made. Eastwood has championed it consistently, screened it for collaborators, referenced it in interviews, and acknowledged that every complicated protagonist he has played or directed exists in the shadow of Ethan Edwards. When asked in a 1992 interview what single film he wished he had directed, Eastwood answered immediately, The Searchers. When asked why, he said because Ford achieved perfection, and perfection cannot be improved upon, only admired. That statement from a director of Eastwood's stature represents the ultimate tribute one artist can pay another, the acknowledgement that some achievements transcend rivalry or ambition, and simply stand as permanent markers of what the medium can accomplish when genius meets material perfectly suited to its expression. These 7 westerns represent the works that humbled one of the genre's greatest practitioners. Eastwood studied them, learned from them, and built his career in dialogue with them. They set standards he spent decades attempting to meet. According to the man who made Unforgiven and the outlaw Josie Wales, these films achieved something beyond his reach.